Disclaimer. To the Pharisees and Karens out there.
How dare you!
All guests on this show do not reflect the opinions of the host. The purpose of this show is to have interesting conversations, stretch our minds, and grow.
Not what we want!
If you are looking for an echo chamber, viewer and listener discretion
is advised.
You talk about extreme.
What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we're about to fill it up.
Join us as we travel and explore the vast unknown. It's a hero's journey with dragons to slay, damsels to save, and innumerable treasures to hoard. Torches high.
Look at it from a different perspective.
Hey guys, what is happening and what is up? Hold out that glass, because you know what time it is, guys. We about to fill it up. Welcome to the Prometheus Lens Podcast, the place where the conversations are always enlightening. I'm your host, Doc Brown, and here we like to use the allegory of the Prometheus Lens to take a second look at everything. Well, I got a great guest for you guys today. I know I say that every week, but I mean it every week. I know I'm partial, okay? Just look over me. But this is a brother that got lined up through a good mutual friend of the show, somebody that we love, the River Winds. So this is a man that's been studying some things and got involved with the River Winds, and they hooked me up with this guy. And I got a great conversation lined up for you, but I'd like to welcome to the show for the first time, hopefully the first of many, Dr. Dan Biddle. Dan, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, just for those that's not familiar with you and this is your first time on the show, just kind of give an introduction, who you are, what you do, and just give everybody a feel.
Great, yeah. So my name's Dan Biddle. I'm president of a ministry called Genesis Apologetics. We provide faith-based training primarily to Christians along the creation evolution discussion. Teenagers nowadays that graduate through high school are drowning in evolution theory, and for most students, and that's not an exaggeration, it's about more than half of the students, it's wiping out their faith, at least in biblical credibility. So we produce all kinds of videos and books and movies that substantiate the Genesis account, because it's true. God really did what he said in Genesis chapters 1 through 11. It's real literal history that we can rely on today. So by way of personal background, I didn't used to believe all of this Genesis stuff was real history. I've been a Christian since age 11. I strayed away for a few years, came back at age 17, and loved studying the Bible and apologetics ever since age 17. But when it came to origins, I didn't know if Genesis was myth, allegory, or real history until about 15 years ago. I took a journey and I specifically studied paleontology, geology, looked at the dinosaur record and Noah's flood, and I pressure tested that topic of Noah's flood for months, and I spent thousands of dollars worth of research, and I flew to locations and became unwaveringly convinced that Noah's flood really happened, and it happened just recently and accounted for the demise of the dinosaurs, and that's led me to help start this ministry and get behind a lot of different movies that we put out. So I'm a research guy by training. I spent about 20 years as a testifying expert in both state and federal court cases. I was involved in over 100 court cases dealing with statistics and research methods. So I love data, I love research, and the Genesis account holds up every which way you want to pressure it and look at it and test it. It holds up as a very, very valid account, and that's been a life-changing awakening for me to realize that. So now our passion is to share that with others.
Amen. Well, how we encountered was, like I said, the River Winds. They're good friends of mine. They're neighbors, and anytime they're doing anything cool down there on their property, they'll call me up. And they called me up a couple months back and was like, "Hey, Justin, we're filming a documentary down here on the property, and if you'd like to come, we got permission. If you'd like to come and do some filming and play with your drones and stuff, you're more than welcome to come on down." And so I came down, and they were filming this documentary on these artifacts and these tablets called the Wallum Ollum, and I'd never heard of it. And they explained to me that it was this Native American tribe called the Lenape, and that there was these birchwood tablets that they had found, and that basically these tablets mirrored the Genesis account of creation, and that they had found these tablets, and that this company that was producing this movie wanted to do this movie with them on these tablets. And so that's how I got introduced to this subject, and they showed me your book and basically introduced us and give me your contact information. So that's why we're here today to talk about this Wallum Ollum. How did you come across this find?
You know, we had just finished our flood movie called The Ark in the Darkness. It was in about 1,000 theaters last year. It's since been seen by millions of people. Really, and this is not a boast, it's probably the leading movie ever done about the historicity and the credibility of Noah's flood. We had spent years doing the research, worked with Sevenfold Films to produce it, and now it's out. It's free on YouTube. You can just go to noahsflood.com to watch it for free. But we had just finished that, and we thought, well, what's next? Well, the Tower of Babel is next. So let's research all the stories that we can find from all these different people groups around the world and find out how that account of the Babel dispersion is echoed throughout history. And you know what? It was like shooting fish in a barrel. Every culture, every major culture knows where they came from. Secular historians won't admit it typically, but if you just take one piece, if you look at the echo of Noah's flood, Nick LaGuardia, a researcher, spent about 10 years researching hundreds of Native American tribes in North and South America, and he documented 300 independent, verifiable stories about Noah's flood, where they took the myth and the legend of that account, and it echoed through multiple generations leading up to today. Over 200 tribes have a story about Noah's flood, over 300 documented different accounts. And the uncanny thing is a number of the accounts have an undeniably similar overlap with Scripture. Themes like sending out a bird to find dry land, or coming back with a twig, or he's in a canoe, he's in there with his family, he lands on a high mountain, he sends a bird out to go look for dry land. It's just, and you can't make this up. And we're talking about groups that were completely isolated from the European scriptures that we had been copying for centuries, and that you get these cultures back together, and the stories that they have happen to overlap the Bible. So, and then one of those stories that stood out was the Wallum Ollum, or it's otherwise known as the Red Score, Red Record. Now, the word red has no connotation with respect to sometimes Native Americans, oftentimes in a disparaging way, being called red or red people. It doesn't mean the red score, the red history, the red record. It refers to the color of the pigment of the ink that was used on the tablet. So that's why it's called the red record or the red score, otherwise known as the Wallum Ollum. We hit that, found some limited initial research that had been done on it back in the 50s. And then, like Noah's flood, the more we pressure tested and looked into the Wallum Ollum, we came away overwhelmingly convinced that it's a true historical artifact carried by the Native Americans for centuries, covering the history of 95 of their chiefs or their sachems over a 3,000-year period. And I'll get into some of the evidence that substantiates that as we go through the presentation.
Yeah, that's amazing because, like I said earlier, when you just find all these supporting evidences throughout the world, like you had mentioned, these cultures that were just isolated. There's too many coincidences to be coincidences, and when I went down there with the river winds, Jens had sent forward this crate with the what's the word I'm looking for? The artifacts, not the actual ones, but the remakes. What's the word I'm looking for?
Oh, the wooden tablets of the Wallum Ollum? Yeah.
Yeah, so that they were remakes of them, but man, they looked so cool and genuine, just like the actual pictures of it.
Yes.
And I actually got to see those and take some pictures and stuff of them. That was really cool.
Oh, that's great. You know, what's interesting about the Wallum Ollum and the flood accounts in general is that when you testify and provide evidence in a court case, sometimes the judge will use a litmus test for evidence, and they'll call it, what does the preponderance of evidence show? And I can tell you, if there was only 10 little scrimpy stories about Noah's flood echoed by the Native Americans, or maybe 15 or maybe even 20, and they didn't have thematic overlaps with Noah's flood, I would probably dismiss the whole thing, as would most reasonable people. But the preponderance of evidence, the overwhelming amount of evidence, is that there's 300 independent historical accounts of Noah's flood carried by Native Americans. I don't know, quite frankly, how secular researchers put a blindfold on and stick their head in the sand when it comes to things like this, because why is it that it is 300 accounts of Noah's flood? Why isn't it only 5? If the Bible is just all myth and fairy tales like the secular narrative would hold, how do you get 300 accounts from 200 different tribal records in history, 200 independent verifiable groups? Because sometimes you look at Native American tribes, they have a lot of overlap with how they identify, but like, for example, the Sioux's got all kinds of different branches of it. But, you know, we've got 300 of these, and they all echo the themes of Noah's flood, and sometimes the overlap with the biblical account in both the sequence and the themes is undeniably overlapping. So yeah, we're standing on good history, his story, when we look at things like Noah's flood. And so you come to something like the Wallum Ollum, and it shouldn't be a big surprise that there's a very clear overlap with this Native American artifact going back to the 1800s and the modern Bibles that we have today.
Yes. Replica, that is the word that was escaping me earlier.
Yes.
But yeah, and even the giant narrative. You know, how many stories do you have with the Native Americans about giants, even in North America?
We're going to get into that
with
today.
Giant tribes, and even in South America, talks about their God just getting mad at the giants and destroying the world with a flood, and then afterwards they build this tall tower to try to evade judgment if he destroys the world with a flood again. So yeah, it's everywhere, brother. It is.
It's incredible. I just found an account the other day where the Mayans and the Aztec line, somewhere back in their history, it had been recorded that they even said that the flood had covered the highest hills by 15 cubits of water. And they said that before they had ever seen a Bible which says 15 cubits of water. So that's just one example. There's a whole host of them just like that. But yeah, I will definitely cover some of the giants today as well, because that is also recorded in the Wallum Ollum.
Nice. Yeah, I'm excited to see what you got, because the Riverwinds didn't really get into detail with me. They just kind of just give me the 30,000-foot view, and I kind of got to look at some of the tablets. So this is my maiden voyage.
Okay, great. Well, let's. You want to go ahead and jump into the presentation then?
Yeah, let's go.
Great. Sounds good. So just a little bit about our ministry. I mentioned a little bit already, but our goal is to provide free creation training through video and book to students around the world. We have a YouTube channel with over 30 million views now, about 250,000 subscribers, and I think we get about 5,000 views a day. On some days it's more than that, but I think that's what we average lately. We put out a lot of movies like Genesis Impact, which is a great movie to see before you go into a secular history museum. We've got a movie on foundations that talks about the significance of believing in a historical version of Genesis and how it can impact your life and how you live it. Here's our slide about Noah's flood. You can watch it free these days. It's also available on streaming platforms, several different streaming platforms like Amazon Prime and Hulu and all those different streaming channels, but you can also watch it free. Just go to noahsflood.com and it's called The Ark and the Darkness. It's about just under 2 hours long, but it's just packed worth of evidence about Noah's flood. Our next one is called Out of Babel. You can see that just by going to outofbabel.com. We've just finished filming in Arizona, and it will be out later in 2026. So give us about 9 months to a year, and this movie will also be hitting the theaters. And I'm going to actually be covering a lot of the evidence and themes that are in that movie. I'm going to be covering today because this movie really does put the Wallum Ollum front and center, where it shows the pilgrims and the Native American people coming together and comparing and contrasting their histories. It's a really fun movie. And here are some of the three of the most recent books that we've recently come out with that overlap and show the Native American histories and how it confirms the Bible. The first one there is called the Wallum Ollum, which is, of course, what we're talking about today. I've got a book on the Nephilim and the giants in North America, and then one that we just finished on Thunderbirds. You would be amazed at the number of tribes. It's over 20 tribes have histories and legends about Thunderbirds, and many people, everyone would admit that Thunderbirds have a significant spiritual significance to Native Americans. But if you go back and look at their histories and what the Europeans wrote about their histories from the 16th century to the 19th century, most Native American tribes also regarded these Thunderbirds as real flying creatures that were extinct, that went extinct within their recent histories, maybe the 1500s or 1600s. But we have all kinds of accounts from Native American historians and the Europeans who wrote and recorded the Native American histories about the Native Americans saying, no, these Thunderbirds were real creatures. They flew down and scooped up our kids, predominantly women, because the men sometimes are too heavy for these bigger birds. But it's basically post-flood pterosaurs that were living and large teratorns that lived during what we would frame as the Ice Age. And the biblical version of the Ice Age is that there's only one of them, lasted about 1,000 years after the flood. But there were large teratorns with 25-foot wingspans flying around, and the Native Americans reported being terrorized by these large creatures. So we took all the stories, accounts, and histories we could find and put that in that book on Thunderbirds and Flying Dragons. Great book. We've got a video that will be coming out for free on YouTube in about 2 months on that same topic. So those are the three that are kind of relevant to what we're going to be covering today. And looking at the Wallum Ollum, here's a painting that was done, I believe, by a native artist. And he depicts a picture of how this Wallum Ollum started. Mr. Rafinesque is the credited person for recording the Wallum Ollum. He was a historian and a professor in the early 1800s. But as he said, there was a European doctor named Dr. Ward who nursed an ailing Native American, Lenni Lenape historian, back to health. The guy was on the verge of death, and Dr. Ward provided him treatment and medicine, and then this guy, as a way of repaying him, gave him a copy of the Wallum Ollum records, which were birch bark tablets with 183 glyphs on them that recorded the early history of humanity and creation as reported by the Lenni Lenape people. So that's where its origin starts. Here's what the book looks like by Rafinesque. He wrote it in 1883. And of course, it narrates incredibly with the story of the Bible, the first 11 chapters, a historical account of creation, the flood, etc. So as you go through this book, you can see it's got 183 different glyphs in it that were allegedly recorded on these tablets. He worked for years and years and years with other people to interpret and record these glyphs that were recorded and memorized in songs using the glyphs as mnemonics for the people who were the designated historians within tribes to remember them. That's how they would remember them, both in sign, song, and glyph. And then they would have them also written down on these tablets. here's what the tablets and the glyphs looked like. Well, actually, the tablets themselves are lost. We don't know what exactly the tablets look like, but it's been believed that they were recorded using red pigment ink like ochre on birch tablets. So the first glyph, you can see here, it says at the first there was the great Manito was hovering over the waters. The great creator God was hovering over the water, and that's got an obvious motif that's very similar to Scripture. And this God was everywhere. I'm going to go through, and we're going to be reading English translations of these as I go on, but I just wanted you to see the original book itself from 1833 and how he recorded these things, and the scholarship that he went through to work with Native Americans and others to get these things interpreted into English.
Are you a hunter, a hiker, or just an outdoor enthusiast? Well, if you are, you know that good quality gear is hard to come by. And finding all-American made is like finding Bigfoot in the woods. Hence the name of Squatch Survival Gear. Head on over to squatchsurvivalgear.com. Use the code PLP10 for 10% off store-wide.
There were also other scholars, Britton and Squire, came along and did very significant scholarship and heavy lifting validating these glyphs and the language and the interpretations of them, or the translations of them as well. All that's been documented in our book. I'm going to try to stay above the weeds during this presentation on the scholarship of them and just treat them at face value, but you can see here the original book in 1833 and what it looked like. If you want a quick distilled version of what we're going to be covering today, you can just go to WallumOllum.com. That's WALAMOLUM, and then you can see our video that we put on YouTube about the Wallum Ollum. And it is, I think it's about 20 minutes long or so, and it goes through the history, significance, finding, and the credibility of it. And then, of course, we've got the book on the Wallum Ollum. I think it's $12 on Amazon, or you can buy it through our website. But if you want to watch that video, just go to the Wallum Ollum, the Red Record of Creation, the Flood, Babel, and the Migration to the Americas, and that should pop right up on YouTube. So can we trust the Wallum Ollum is credible? Well, I'd like to spell that out to you in 3 different ways. I'm going to block this in here. I'm going to prove as much as I can in maybe 30 minutes using early history that was written before the Wallum Ollum was discovered. Then we'll look at the Wallum Ollum credibility itself, and then we'll look at some things that were discovered after the Wallum Ollum that validate the Wallum Ollum itself. So just looking at these briefly, we can validate the practice of using bark to record significant history. I've got some evidence to show you that shows very clearly that it was in fact a practice of Native American tribes, particularly in the Lenni Lenape region, for recording history on bark using ochre or etching. We'll look at a rare 17th century testimony from a Lenni Lenape native about this topic. Then we'll look at some internal credibility of the Wallum Ollum, and then we'll look at how the recent migratory path that's recorded in the Wallum Ollum has actually just recently been validated by Dr. Nathaniel Jensen by looking at genetic markers that show the direction and the timing of this people group coming from the west to the east coast. It's incredible. It maps right on top of the Wallum Ollum's history. And then we'll also look at some historical places and events that were discovered after the Wallum Ollum that validates the event, that validate the events in the Wallum Ollum. So that's how we're going to break it down. We'll look at the early history that validates it beforehand. We'll look at a snapshot of the document itself. Then we'll discuss some things that happen afterwards that give it credibility. This is a fun story. I'm just going to have to read this to you because it is a significant introduction to the Wallum Ollum. Imagine this guy Jasper, I can't pronounce that last name, Dankarts perhaps, it's probably got a spin to it there, but imagine this, he's writing this in his journal, He's talking about this 80-year-old native Lenni Lenape guy that he meets. It's Monday, October 16th, 1679. Now, the Wallum Ollum was allegedly discovered around 1820, then was documented and written about in 1833. But here's this account from this Jesuit European explorer on Monday, October 16th, 1679. And as I read this, I just want you to think about one thing. This is an account of what an 80-year-old Lenni Lenape guy said in 1679, and it sounds to me, as we're going to go through the Wallum Ollum, that this guy learned his history from the Wallum Ollum. And we'll go through and just read this together. I know it's long, but it's really cool as we get through it. So this guy's writing in his diary in 1679. He says, I was occupied today in copying my journal. In the morning there came an Indian to our house, a man about 80 years of age, whom our people called Jasper, who lived at Hassanak or at Achenon. We asked him where he believed he came from. He answered, from his father. And where did your father come from, we said, and your grandfather and great-grandfather, and so on to the first of the race. He was silent for a little while, either as if unable to climb up at once so high with his thoughts, or to express them without help. Remember, this guy was 80 years old. Then he took a piece of coal out of the fire where he sat, and he began to write upon the floor. So I wonder if this guy's reflecting back to a glyph that he was seen or trained in his earlier years. He first drew a circle, then an oval, to which he made 4 paws or feet, a head and a tail. He's obviously drawing a turtle. And the Lenni Lenape called themselves sometimes the turtle people, and they talked about the turtle land. This, he says, is a tortoise lying in the water around it. It's almost as if he's describing a glyph from the Wallum Ollum. And he moved his hand round the figure, continuing, this was or is all water, and so at first was the world or the earth, when the tortoise gradually raised its round back up high, and the water ran off of it. These are exactly like the Wallum Ollum glyphs as we go through. And thus the earth became dry. And then he took a little straw and placed it on the end of the middle of the figure and proceeded. The earth was now dry, and there grew a tree in the middle of the earth, and the root of this tree sent forth a sprout beside it, and there grew upon it a man, who was the first male. This man was then alone, and would have remained alone. But the tree bent over until its top touched the earth, and there shot up another root, from which came another sprout, and there grew upon it the woman. And from these two are all men produced. Now, we're reading this and we're conditioned. We don't see how profoundly similar this is to Genesis. Why isn't he talking about a cricket that turned into a rat that turned into of the first man? Or why didn't the woman get created first and then the first man? Or why isn't it the chicken and the egg thing get reversed? And why is he talking about earth being raised up out of water and then the earth being responsible for giving birth to the first man and then a woman that comes afterwards? In fact, there are 10 different things that this pre-Wallum Ollum Lenni Lenape man, which is the people that gave birth to this Wallum Ollum, there are 10 things that overlap with both the Wallum Ollum and the Bible in many ways. So the first is this guy's talking about a turtle and a tortoise, which is a consistent theme throughout the Wallum Ollum. He's got a circle with water, land rising out of the water with water running off the land. Right there, that's Genesis 1. And this guy's writing in 1679. Earth became dry after this emergence. Only land and water were at the very beginning, just like the Bible and just like the Wallum Ollum. A tree grew from the middle of the earth. The human race began with the first male. A lonely man would have remained in that state without the first woman who came along. The first woman was created after man, and all humans came from this first couple. So we think this is just a common story because we're conditioned about the Genesis account. But if this is just some odd story, some myth that this guy chose to redraw with a glyph that he was probably trained in from his earlier years, it could have been about anything. A frog, a cow, a lizard, a stream, a separate planet. There's anything he could have pulled from. But it just so happens that this 80-year-old Lenni Lenape native in the year 1679 pulls from something that's incredibly overlapping with the Bible and incredibly overlapping with the Wallum Ollum, all at the same time. And he even draws a glyph in the ground. It's what his de facto way was for explaining how he came from, where he came from, and the sequence and the order of creation was almost an exact repetition of what we're going to see in the Wallum Ollum. So there we have it, something in 1679 that was predating of the Wallum Ollum that's just like it. So here we have something from the 7th annual report of the Smithsonian, and it is a pre-1820s birch bark etching of the histories that was recorded by these people groups. This is not the Lenni Lenape, it's an adjacent tribe, but here we have an example of how the native peoples were recording their histories on birch tablets. Here's another one that was done in before 1825, a Sacred Birch Bark Records. So we know these Native Americans were doing this practice before 1820. They were etching out memorable and significant historical events on birch bark. So why wouldn't they go all the way back to their early beginnings? So here we have just an example of the practice.
So it wasn't just a lover's thing, guys. It wasn't something we come up with, going in the woods and writing your sweetheart's name with a heart in. They were doing this long before us.
Yes, you've got it. And we still have these artifacts today proving this is exactly what they did. Good. So let's look at the Wallum Ollum Bible overlap. So you'll notice two things very similar as we go through comparing the Bible and the Wallum Ollum. It's both the sequence of the events and the events themselves. When you want to look at validating something, it's one thing to have the same basic elements between two different stories, but if the elements are timed in sequence going together and they're connected in the same way, now all of a sudden we have a really strong overlap. It's a two-dimensional overlap. You've got the same basic components and they're arranged in the same way, in the same order. And that's exactly what we have when we compare the Wallum Ollum with the Bible. Here are the same major themes that are connected in a similar order. And I would also argue that the differences and the distinctions that exist between these 183 glyphs and the Bible also validates the fact that they are telling their own history because it's not an identical overlap. There are some distinctions, which is exactly what you would expect if this group carried
perspectives.
Yeah, their Genesis history from millennia in the past. We've got things like, they both talk about one creator God, the first man and the first woman. They talk about a garden and food. There's one primary evil spirit being. They both talk about that. They both talk about Noah's flood. Here we have a small difference. In the Lenni Lenape account with the Wallum Ollum, they ascribe the flood to being caused by Satan, the one evil Manito, that as they would call it, is the one that sent the flood. They also said that Satan is responsible for creating gnats and mosquitoes and some evil giant reptiles. Isn't that interesting?
I agree.
Yeah, we would agree. Anyone who's lived in the down south would agree, I would think. So, and then of course we have a human restart with the patriarch like Noah. The Wallum Ollum talks about giants, it talks about the Ice Age, and it has the migration that goes across 95 different sachems or chiefs spanning a 3,000-year period. So for me, these are very confirmatory things in two ways. Number one, it's a legit historical account of the Lenni Lenape people, and it substantiates the history that they had was echoed from the Babel dispersion, which they kept the same sequence and order and same basic events in Genesis all the way through to their histories. And you know what's fascinating is it's not just the Lenni Lenape. If you go back through Native American history, many of them have the motif of the flood, as we talked about earlier, as well as the Babel dispersion and some of the other basic things that are in the Bible's history.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on from there, let's dig right in. Now, I don't have time, of course, to read through all of these, so let's just look at the first one, the first tablet, the first 8 glyphs, and then we'll kind of scan through some of the other ones, because I think I've got maybe 7 or 8 of these tablets up. So let's just look at the first one. So mentioned this before, so the first glyph says, at first in that place at all times above the earth. Second glyph, over in an extended fog there was a great Magneto. And of course the Bible is God hovering over the water at the beginning, right? And there was nothing there, and God breathed, the Latin ex nihilo. He breathed, he spoke a word and established creation. So at first, forever lost in space, everywhere this great Magneto was, he made the extended land and the sky. He made the sun, moon, and stars. He made them all move evenly. And look at the order of events here. We don't have mammals yet. We don't have fish. With the Genesis account, God forms the earth and then he fills it. We don't have mammals, man, fish, and birds until days 5 and 6. So far, we're very, very similar to the Bible's account. Then the wind blew violently, and it cleared off, and the water flowed off far and strong. So almost like let the dry land appear day through creation. And all groups of island grew nearly, and then they remained. Then if we look at the next book here, glyphs 9 through 14, it continues. It puts a man, the grandfather of all men, and also puts a sign of dominion on that man, like everything is going to be underneath that man. Then we put in the first mother. Then we have the fish and the beasts and the birds, like under his dominion. And then we have on glyph 14, an evil Magneto made evil beings only monsters. That's the first sign of the Genesis 6 problem. We've got a very clear record here with the Lenni Lenape breaching the subject of giants, because they called it the Magneto made evil beings only monsters, and later we'll see that they called the snake people that were birthed by or of this evil Magneto, they called them the Makawini, which means big men. Very, very interesting, very significant to what the Bible talks about.
And the snake people too, you know?
Yes, yeah. Exactly, the snake people. So we have here the snake continuing on book number 1. At the we've got in the middle here we have to those very first men, the very first mothers. The wives came, they found food in a garden. Everything was great, but then at glyph 21, very secretly, an evil being, a mighty magician, came on earth. A powerful evil snake came about. Look, he's hiding underneath the ground, and he comes up. And then he starts wrecking things. We go on, and then on glyph number 2, book number 2, glyph 1, we have the first introduction of the Makawini. Long ago there was a mighty snake and beings evil to men. And then there's another translation that says when the big men stayed there, human beings lived on earth. There's another footnote there that they say human beings who lived on this earth prior to the deluge are said by the Shawnee to have been larger than people who are living now and lived longer, which is exactly what the Bible account has, with the Genesis patriarchs living an average of 912 years. Very fascinating. So this evil snake starts conflict with the human line, glyph number, book 2 there. This mighty snake hated those who were there and greatly disquieted those whom he hated. They did both harm. They injured each other. They were not at peace. They were driven from their homes. And now we go on. Now we have the flood. The mighty snake firmly resolved to flood and to harm men. He brought 3 persons, a monster, rushing water between the hills, and the water rushed and rushed, dashing through and through, destroying much. But then we have Nanabush, which is also a similarly named patriarch Noah theme that's carried over in many different tribes. They all have a Noah type of guy, and sometimes his name actually sounds like Noah. Here we have Nanabush, the strong white one, the grandfather of all beings, of all men, was on Turtle Island. He preserves humanity and then gets off, as we see as book 2 continues. And then book 3, glyph 1 and 2, after the rushing waters have subsided, the Lenape of the turtle were close together in hollow houses living together. And then, look at this, we have the onset of the Ice Age. Now, from a biblical creation standpoint, this science is very, very clear. We are the only group around that has a true mechanism for one single mass ice age. The secularists have got 5. They have different mechanisms that they think started the ice age, but we've got it. It's very clear when you cover the earth with flood and you have catastrophic plate tectonics and volcanism going on. The ash and the aerosols go up from the volcanics. They block the sun. They bring cooling. You've got the glaciers being pulled up and held in water's held in ice. You've got perfect conditions for a ice age that began about 100 years after the flood and lasted for about 1,000 years.
With the price of eggs and bread slowly approaching a day's wages, it's more important than ever than to secure the value of your dollar. One thing that has remained steady is gold and silver throughout the ages. Back in Roman times, a piece of gold would get you a toga. That's the equivalent of $3,000 today. That still remains true to this day. For a full suit, shoes, tie, you're looking at about $3,000. Because gold and silver holds its value. So if you're tired of watching the value of your dollar go down every single day, it's time to get off your hands and make a move. I recently teamed with Cornerstone Asset and Metals. Reach out to those guys for all of your financial needs. It's time to trade in that forever devaluing dollar into hard assets that you can hold, like gold and silver. Be sure to check the link down in the description or the number on the screen. And hey, tell them Doc Brown sent you.
So
Walt Brown, his hydroplate theory was amazing to me. It answered so many questions.
Yeah, there's 2 somewhat competing theories in creation science. You've got the hydroplate theory framed by Brown, and you've got catastrophic plate tectonics. We lean catastrophic plate tectonics, but I can tell you that I think when we all go to heaven and we get to see the replay button, I think people from both camps are going to be surprised at how it actually happened. But yeah, there's tons of evidence that it absolutely happened. We've got all kinds of geological evidence that it happened. But here we've got this Native American document, allegedly from the early 1800s, that have got the sequence of events the same as the Bible. They've got one great creator. They've got Satan. They've got the creation of man and woman, and then a garden, and then they've got an evil snake that comes and brings bad things, and then we've got the flood. Then we've got an ice age after the flood. How on earth would Native Americans know to park the ice age after Noah's flood? It's incredible.
It's amazing.
Yeah, just incredible. Then the last one we'll take a look at here is really the beginning of the dispersion on book 3. It talks about how they're going to start spreading around now. They're going to be chasing the deer and the buffalo. They're going to stretch. They separate into house builders and hunters. And then after this time, they start naming significant sachems or chiefs who were leading their tribe and their community through these various parts of America as they travel from the West Coast to the East Coast. And the amazing thing that we'll see here is they run into the snake land that had the snake people, and they were terrified of these snake people, and they did battle with the snake people, and they actually formed an alliance with other Native American tribes to drive them down the Mississippi. And we've got great evidence for that too. I'll continue on here as we go through. So we've got this migration of the Lenni Lenape people to the Americas. So the biblical account is that they dispersed from the Tower of Babel about 4,300 years ago or so. And the Lenni Lenape people went this direction. And when we pick it up across the Bering Strait, they go into the Americas. This is where Dr. Nathaniel Jensen's evidence is clutch. He comes in and shows, using genetic markers and evidence, how this migratory path absolutely happened, just like the Wallum Ollum said. It's incredible. Here's his capstone article on the piece. It says, Young Earth Y chromosome clocks confirm known post-Columbian Amerindian population history and suggest pre-Columbian population replacement in the Americas. Fancy speak, for he tracked the Lenni Lenape people and confirmed the Wallum Ollum. He's an endorser of the Wallum Ollum. He was as surprised as we were to see how much genetic evidence maps right on top of two things, both the direction of the migratory path and the timing of the migratory path. So this is an interesting graph here that shows, as they start going from the northwest here, they start coming down. When they get into where we find most of the giant skeletons in America, they said the strong stone people, or the snakes, or the invaders, that's where they started having combat with the Makawini, the snake people. And
is that the Ohio River Valley?
The Ohio River Valley. And lo and behold, I'm going to show you that next. Let me just speed up to that one. I'm going to come back. Here is a map of 3,000 giant skeletons that have been reported all over America. So we don't want to be branded as conspiracy people, so we did our own research and dug into the research of others. We found 885 documented accounts of giant skeletons reported by 1,200 people, reporting over 3,000 giant skeletons found, most of them between 7 and 12 feet tall, all over America. And isn't it interesting when you look at this map, because we plotted the whole thing out, where they start saying that they ran into the snake people is where the clustering is of the Ohio River Valley. Here's a Smithsonian document, and it's hard to see here, but each one of these little tiny orange dots is where they found mounds. And when they found this in 1894, before this is when the map was made, and they had the Smithsonian historians document all these, they estimated that there were tens of thousands of these mounds. We now know there's hundreds of thousands of these mounds, and there's hundreds and hundreds of earthworks that happen to be aligned with the sun, moon, and stars, the solstices, the equinoxes. These people who built these mounds were really into star worship, which is expressly forbidden in the Bible. And a number of them were tall and worked with advanced metallurgy and copper, and they were into human sacrifice and all kinds of stuff that they shouldn't be into. So we would say that they're Nephilim-associated or Nephilim-influenced tribes. I'll go back to where we left off right here. Isn't this interesting? Look at this guy. A Native American Lenni Lenape historian says, quote, the cannibals, and we know that the Bible talks about the Nephilim as sometimes the land that eats itself, or sometimes the cannibalistic practices. Many Native American tribes report that these ogres, the large ones, the tall ones, were eating other humans. It's a very consistent theme we see in Native American legends. And this Lenni Lenape guy says, the cannibals began to grow until they became vicious giants. It is these giants who are buried in the Indian mounds. Fortunately, the giants finally died out. Freddie Washington, what a nice, succinct story confirming this. And he doesn't even mention the Wallum Ollum, but we've got the Nephilim-associated events and creatures described as the snake people, the Makawini, and the Wallum Ollum. Moving on here, we talked about this a little bit before the show. This is a wake-up pill that many Christians have not taken yet, but if you just take the Bible itself, look, I am a sola scriptura Christian. I'm not into crazy stuff. I'm not into crazy conspiracy. I don't wear 10 hats. If you just take the Bible at face value and you disregard all the other books that talk about giants, Jasher, Enoch, all that other stuff, all the extra biblical books, just focus on the Bible itself. You've got 20 passages of scripture alone that talk about the Raphaim, the Anakim, Goliath, and all his brothers. the Nephilim, it's quite obvious that something was going on. You've got a picture of King Og's bed here, 14 feet long. Goliath was 9 feet 9 inches. The giant was a phenomenon in just Scripture alone. And then we go around in Israel and find things like this. In 1962, this guy's out tilling his field in Israel and uncovers a 26-inch spearhead. You can go see it in museums today. It weighed only 1/3 the weight of Goliath's. Goliath says, the Bible says his armor weighed 125 pounds. His spearhead was 15 pounds and some ounces. And the shaft was the diameter of a weaver's beam, about the size of a man's wrist. And this spearhead that he found, that has got battle scars on it, was found next to hundreds of copper scales that would have been woven together in a Goliath-like halberd or coat of arms, or like a big shield breastplate that he would have worn. So, but this spear was only 4.5 pounds, still very unwieldable by your normal human today. And here we've got the story in 2 Samuel that talks about this guy Ishbenob, was also a giant, had a spear that weighed 300 shekels, which was much lighter than Goliath's. It was only about half the weight of Goliath's, but still 7.3 pounds reported in the Bible. Goliath was 15 pounds. Here we have a 4.5 pound spearhead. Then we even get to things like Abraham Lincoln himself, who says the eyes of that species of extinct giants whose bones filled the mountains of America have gazed on Niagara as ours do now. So he wrote this in his diary while looking at Niagara Falls. And to Abraham Lincoln and the OG guys that he was spending time with, the people who were archaeologists and professors of the then burgeoning institutions of America, it was common knowledge that what they were finding in these mounds was not of plain human origin. They're finding copper and metallurgy and human sacrifice stuff and these big copper axes and skeletons that are averaging 7 to 9 feet tall. Abraham Lincoln's like, yeah, they're giants and they're extinct. Very interesting that he would say that. Said that in 1848. We covered this. We've got all these different, the whole Ohio Valley here is peppered with all these giant mounds. The Lenni Lenape says these giant mounds were built by the giants. Here we have the map that we talked about before. You guys, again, it's just like the flood with Native Americans. If it was just 12 Native American tribes and 12 accounts that talked about the flood, I'd dismiss it. It's a wacky theory, right? But it's 300 different accounts from Native Americans. And the giants, come on, there's 3,000 reported giant skeletons by 1,194 people in 885 accounts. And so don't tell me there's not something going on in the 1800s and the 1900s when all these accounts were coming out. And of course,
there's spearhead you talked about.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but that spearhead you talked about, I'll throw it up in the B-roll in the editing. But Chief Joseph, up there in the Ohio River Valley, up next to Michigan, next to the Isle Royale, where that big copper mine is.
Yes,
he found a huge bronze spear. And it's just a spearhead, and it's I don't know how many inches it is, but if it's every bit of 2.5 to 3 foot.
It is,
and that thing weighs probably 10 to 12 pounds every bit.
It is.
That thing's huge.
It is incredible, and in fact, it looks just like this one on the far right. That one's out of flint, I believe, but that was found in the mounds. This 38-pound copper axe was found in the mound. And the one in the other guy's hand was, the center guy's other hand is 27 pounds. And then we have these huge stone axes that are found all over the place. So, yeah, people were not building these implements. And the secularists are just like, oh, well, that's just ceremonial. Well, I'm not sure about that. You know how long it would take to make a 38-pound ceremonial axe? And in some places, when they found these copper implements buried in graves, they learned that they were found them like beneath giant skeletons. The copper axes are more aged and antiqued and patinaed than the copper implements that were buried with their burial. So obviously they were keeping these implements from previous generations. Very interesting looking at this. So, but look at this, you guys. Again, it's not like just the Choctaw had one little random story about the giants. These giant myths and legends are echoed all over the place. This is just an example. I think it's actually 26 tribes that have giant histories to them. So it's all over the place, and we've got implements like this. And it's not just the fact that they were tall people. We've learned that these earthworks that they were building not only had shapes and dimensions that were based upon what they call like the Hopewell acre or the Hopewell dimensions, that were very, very specific, that required very advanced measuring and distance tools that we would say that the Native Americans did not have when Europeans arrived in the 1800s and 1900s. It's almost like technology went backwards when you go back in the history, which is a good tell that they were getting Nephilim-associated information and technology back then. But whoever built and designed these earthworks in Ohio, there's 498 earthworks in just one state, 498. And a number of these, not all of them, but dozens of them, do have planetary alignments. Whoever built these things were able to read the sun, moon, and stars, the orbits, all that stuff, with technology that the Native Americans that the Europeans encountered in the 1700s and 1800s were not using those types of technologies. Has nothing to do with some evolutionary timeline. It's just the fact that the nomads and the Native Americans who were cruising around North America, when the Europeans arrived and they documented the then present history, were not into building these types of structures. And when the Native Americans were interviewed about these structures, they repeatedly said they were built by the giants who were here before us. Fascinating. Fascinating history.
And that Newark site, Fritz Zimmerman just discovered recently that the hinge of that site lines up perfectly to the sunrise on Beltane.
Wow!
I mean that's Nephilim right there, the worship of Baal.
Yes, it's the history of what happened in North America has got some dark history to it. So. This guy, Doug Van Dorn, I watched a presentation that he did. He was able to find not only just when you study the Serpent Mound in Ohio, which is over a mile long, and it also lines up with the sun, moon, and stars, he found 5 others just like it worldwide. Mm-hmm. And why are people obsessed with serpents? Where would they get that idea from? Why are they doing that? Why are they into worshiping them? And a number of them had pedestals and altars in front of them for sacrificial practices. So who's driving these people to make big serpent snake replicas and kill people sacrificially?
Who's the prince of the power of the air?
You got it. It's amazing. And Van Dorn found 5 other types of serpent effigies all over the world. And when you look at some of the mound builders and you look at their, quote, ceremonial axes that were 37 pounds or 38 pounds or 27 pounds, and the fact that they're wearing horns on their head and they've got all these signs and symbols, a number of which look to be carried over by the Illuminati type of groups today. They seem to be significant to other pagan dark practices today. Why were they so into this stuff? Working with copper metallurgy, and one of the sites they found over 100 sacrificially killed young ladies, like 18 to 25-year-olds, who were all ceremonially killed. This is not the Native Americans that the Europeans encountered when they came here in the 1600s and 1700s. They weren't doing this type of stuff. The mound builders some of the mound builders were, especially the old ones, and you go back and you find that's where the 7 to 9 footers came from. And they were into serpents. They had an obsession with serpents and worshiping the sun, moon, and stars, which I can't tell you how many times in the Old Testament God said, no, don't you dare worship the sun, moon, and stars. That's forbidden. Mm-hmm. And here we have this group obsessed with it. Then we've got things like this. This is the Bureau of Ethnology. They call them the stone people or the stone cannibals. These are written and colored and illustrated by the Native Americans who are carrying these traditions and saying things that are specific enough to saying, yeah, the giants were cannibals, and the only way we could kill them is by shooting them in the face with bows and arrows. That's just one example. We've got the Lovelock Caves where they're finding these mortar and pestles that really outweighed what normal people could do. This secular curator of this museum in Nevada says that this had to be wielded by a giant because it's huge. I forget how heavy this pestle is, but it's gigantic. Then we've got other stories by this one recorded by a historian named Cusick, who's talking about this Native American myth and legend that was carried on and on and on. That this giant would go and put a bear and a deer in his belt and walk around with these things. Why are they repeating stories like these giants? Why is it in the Wallum Ollum, and why is it in the Bible over and over and over again? And in fact, the Bible giant wars that happened around the time of David were about 1000 BC and prior. The Native American stories overlap right on top of that. Whatever giant phenomenon was going on in North America could have also been happening at the same time in Israel. Just a couple more things here, and then we'll wrap up and maybe take some Q&A, just a couple more slides. The other thing is, of course, just go look at the maps of South America, Peru, South America, these areas, and Virginia. When people were getting here, why are they saying that these giant Native Americans, in some cases, Captain Smith is saying, yeah, their calves were 27 inches around and 7, 8, 9 feet tall, and they're drawing these pictures of them and saying gigantus people. They're writing down all these giants, and these map after map after map shows these giant Native Americans. Here's some from Captain Smith. And then, of course, well, what about the physical evidence? Well, I think it's quite obvious. L.A. Marzulli went to Catalina and initially found this picture that's on the right side of your screen in a state publicly funded museum on Catalina Island, which is right off the shore of Southern California. And he showed in this museum that they only had the top half of this picture shown here, where this is Ralph Glidden. I believe it's the 1930s. All they showed, what they used to show, was just the top half of this picture. Interestingly, now they took the whole exhibit out. It's no longer in the museum. I've got pictures of it. It's all was originally there. But when Marzulli found it, they only had the top half of this picture. But he had found in the museum archives the complete picture, which shows Ralph Glidden standing in front of a 9-foot skeleton. You can see, as I'm talking about the picture that's in the right half of the screen, if you look in the top left of that picture, you can see a human skull. Compare the size of that human skull to the one that's in the foreground, and it can't be more than, maybe 10 feet in front of it. It's got to be about double the size. They know how tall Ralph Glidden was. He hired 3 independent forensic photograph experts to measure this skeleton, and the estimates came in between 8.5 feet tall and 9 feet tall. So here we've got a picture of Ralph Glidden digging up giant skeletons on Catalina Island, and the sequence of events is the museum displayed only the top half initially. Then L.A. Marzulli called them out and said, you guys are misrepresenting what's going on here. Show the whole picture. So they did show the whole picture for years, and now recently they just removed the whole thing, expecting the whole deal to be forgotten. But then we've got other pictures of these giant skeletons in Ohio, clearly over 7 feet, 7.5 feet tall.
That bottom left one, I have a copy of that one. That's from the Serpent Mound.
Yes.
That one was 7 feet at the knees.
Yeah.
And when they dug it up, the feet and hands were missing.
Yeah,
and so
incredible.
I posed the question, did it have 6 fingers and 6 toes?
Oh, man, I don't see the hands there. But Ralph Glidden's pictures, the one that Marzulli found, he's got documented pictures from Glidden skeletons that he found with 6 fingers on hands. Incredible. So let's see, and of course they've got places like Monk's Mound and Cahokia. Many people don't even know this, but these mound builders were building pyramids that were the size of the Pyramid of Giza, larger at its base than the Pyramid of Giza. And a number of these things were built in coordination with the sun, moon, and stars, and equinoxes and solstices. And in some places they found, all kinds of sacrificed bodies and everything. So these legends about the snake people that they were so afraid of and called cannibals by the recent Lenni Lenape history, they've just ditched this stuff, but the Wallum Ollum had it right. They recorded the giants, and they framed it in a way that is very overlapping to how the Bible would regard giants. So that is the last slide that I have today. I'll stop sharing my screen, but would love to talk about this some more. I know I just gave a didactic rundown of everything, but would love to hear what you think and go from there.
Oh no, shoot! I just loved hearing about the stories and stuff because me and my audience, man, we've went down a lot of those trails that you kind of touched on. I've talked with LA several times, and he's give us the story about them pictures and talked about that stuff. I've talked with another guy named Charles, and he went through all the histories of. I can't remember the name of it now, but there was all these different books of the Native American stories, and he deep dived with us on the Allegheny.
Oh, yes.
And how they were a giant
They absolutely
tribe.
were. In fact, that word even means giant. When you start peeling the onion layer back, there was a famous colonel, I think he was, a historian that talked about those people and very much said that they were giants. I mean, you've got the Native American traditions that are carried and echoed for centuries verbally, but then when the Europeans arrived in the 1600s, 1700s, the Jesuits, the explorers, all this stuff, they began recording, of course, and writing what these Native Americans were saying. And it's amazing because I think the most honoring thing we can do for the Native Americans is represent their stories as recorded, as historically recorded. And I had to dig a lot of this stuff up from books you will not find in libraries. But the Smithsonian themselves are documenting a lot of this stuff. So, and they're not. We know these books existed. I've got the 1890 Smithsonian book where the Smithsonian itself nowadays says their formal position is that 0 giants have ever been recorded or talked about by anybody in North America. That's their official position. And then I can go back with Smithsonian documents I have in my possession, published by the Smithsonian, that report being sent or discovering 17 Native American or 17 giant skeletons uncovered in Native American burials. 17 of them, between 7 and 9 feet tall. So which is it?
Yeah.
So it's but all this does for me as a Christian is it just confirms the Bible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Solidifies your faith.
Solidifies my faith. And a number of Christians are not ready to take, is it the red pill or the blue pill? I think it's the red pill, right? The one that wakes you up. Yeah. And many people are not ready for it or don't believe it or whatever, but it wasn't just Goliath. Goliath's brothers were tribes of the Anakim, and they were likely tall giants as well. And you've got the Rephaim, and the Hebrew historians back then, they knew what this giant thing was, and they recorded it in a lot of extra biblical books as well.
Yeah, and it was normal. And that's the thing, is like a lot of people, like when I was growing up, they struck up Goliath was like, oh, you guys watch basketball, you know who Shaquille O'Neal is. He was like Shaquille O'Neal. And yeah, he might have been, but we see these guys on TV and we're like, oh yeah, that's normal. That's not normal. 7 foot, 7.5 to 8 foot tall people, just because you see them on TV, that's not normal. That's less than 2% of the population.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm not saying these NBA players are Nephilim, but I'm saying that's not normal.
Yeah, the Europeans were in the mid 5 feet, lower 5 feet, and the Native Americans were not over 6 feet traditionally. So, and you look at Shaquille O'Neal, okay, 340, 350 pounds, 7'3". And then I hired a guy who was 6.5 feet tall who played D1 basketball or D1 football to wield a Goliath spear replica. And if he was coming after me, he wouldn't put a scratch on me because I'd see it coming. He moves like a snail. It's too heavy. You have 15-pound spearhead that's going to be over 2 feet long, and it's the diameter of a weaver's beam, and Goliath was 9 feet 9 inches. That's 2.5 feet taller than Shaquille O'Neal, and typically people are, the width to height ratio is 2 to 1. So if Goliath was 9 feet 9 inches, if Shaq was 7'3" and is in the 300s, what would Goliath be at 9 feet 9 inches? Well, our calculations show about 450 pounds at least. Well, think about it. He was wearing a coat of mail that was 125 pounds, and he had a bronze helmet on, and then he had a spear, then just the head of it weighed 15 pounds. So we're not talking about a human here. We're talking about a Nephilim. He was a, half-breed, a hybrid. It's very, very clear.
Yeah.
The sons of God that was their origin.
Yeah, and it was a normal thing, and that's why in the Bible they just kind of touch on it and go. They don't really focus on it because it was a normal thing. They've seen it everywhere. Yeah, and like you said, I mean, it's not just the Native Americans. It's in the Bible. It's the Spanish explorers. I spoke with a woman. She is from Aruba, and she found a lot of Amerigo Vespucci's journal writings and stuff from down there. And he said that when he first came to Aruba, that he was met on the beach by a group of women, and said that on their knees they were head and shoulders taller than the men. Wow.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's everywhere. In fact, you could just take all the Native American tribal stories and close that chapter and just look at what the sailors and explorers found in South America. I mean, look at Peru and all those different places. I mean, even some of the names of the countries even mean big feet. Patagonia, that was derived from the word big feet. And there's all kinds of spiritual things that were going on back then too about how they were associated with the giants. So it's most every culture has got some history that can be traced back to the giants like this. But the Native Americans, like I said, it's over 20 tribes have got this story, and it's in the Lenni Lenape history, and it's in the Wallum Ollum as well. It's everywhere. For those of us who want to drill into it, the Bible only confirms the Bible's history.
Yeah, and I'm of the belief that even America, when you get into the etymology of that name, there's two ways you can go about it. I mean, some people say, oh, it's named after Amerigo Vespucci, and then another etymological path you could go down is the Amaru, the serpent, the land of the serpent.
Wow, I've never learned that. I don't know the history of the name, but very, very interesting. But yeah, the South Americans, the maps and everything, we tried to represent a number of the maps that have giants on them in our Out of Babel movie. I think we managed to get 3 or 4 in the final cut, but there's at least a half a dozen 1500s, 1400s, 1600s maps that talk about land of the giants. Watch out! Don't go over here. So it's very prevalent. Yes.
Yeah. Man. Well, Dan, I appreciate you coming on and spending your time with us and enlightening us all. This was very fascinating. And like I said, I had a 30,000-foot view, so you took me on the maiden voyage and blew my mind, and I'm sure you blew a lot of my listeners' minds, so I really appreciate it.
That's great. And look, we're not here to sell anything. Most of our stuff is free and downloadable, but the Wallum Ollum book is like, what, $10, $11, something like that. You can buy it on Amazon. If we've got some skeptics online today, I challenge people, read that book. It's not, I just covered the tips of the trees. There's so much evidence supporting this as real history, and we put a lot of it in that book. Or you can watch the video. I think the video is about 20 minutes long, and it's got tons of very credible goosebump level evidence is that this is a real artifact from the Native Americans.
Nice. Hey, before we go, let everybody know the website and like the YouTube channel where they can find this stuff.
Yeah, sure. Our ministry name is just Genesis Apologetics, and the Wallum Ollum website is just Wallum Ollum, WALAMOLUM, WallumOllum.com, and you can go there and you can see where to buy the book and watch the video for free.
Nice. Well, guys, be sure to check out his stuff and take a deep dive. Like he said, he just scratched the surface and kind of give you guys the highlight version. There's a lot of meat to be had, so dive in and get your forks and your knives out and dive in, guys. Hey, but until next time, torch is high, guys.